Hello and welcome. It's time for another edition of the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. We've got a great show lined up for you today, and I want to remind everybody we are back again tomorrow. It's been a long time, but Troy Taylor is going to visit us from American Hauntings, The Rise of the Spirit World and the Birth of the Modern Ghost Hunter. He has got some fascinating stories you guys are going to want to hear, so make sure you're here with us. We'll talk about what really happened at the Fox home in New York with the Fox sisters, famous Fox sisters. We'll talk about Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, spiritualism. We'll talk about seances in the White House. We'll talk about who were the first ghost hunters in American history and more. That's a rich topic that we're going to be on tomorrow. And then on tomorrow night, as a matter of fact, I'll also be hosting Coast to Coast AM. So you can check me out from midnight till 4 a.m. Central Time. And I hope you'll check that. You can go to coasttocoastam.com. That's coasttocoastam.com. And you'll be able to find out what stations and times in your city and state. It's on over 600 stations around the world. So make sure you check that out so you can find out how you can listen to me. And then I'm back again on Saturday. And this is going to be a big show. For those of you true crime fans, you're going to want to join me as we talk Soaked in Bleach. We're going to talk about the death of Kurt Cobain for all 4 hours. It is a case you need to hear. A lot of you may not be familiar with this, but there's been a lot of speculation that the suicide or apparent suicide of Kurt Cobain is not what it seems. There may be a murder involved. We're going to talk to some people behind the scenes on this who've done a lot of research, a lot of investigation, and have some new lights to shed on this subject for us. That's on Saturday on Coast to Coast AM. Again, midnight till 4 a.m., and I hope you'll join me for that. Tonight, though, joining us, this is a lot of fun. Joining us, one of our favorite guests. He's back again, and here to talk to us about a new book called Spirits of the Cage, True Accounts of Living in a Haunted Medieval Prison. Richard Estep is back with us. Richard, thank you so much for joining us, and I wanted to let you know Tim sends his best. He's sorry he can't be here as he is still on the mend with the foot issue that he's going through, but he wishes he could be here and wanted to just send his best wishes to you.
Dave, thanks. It's always a pleasure to come on. And I was going to say give my best to the big fella, but I hear he's not such a big fella these days.
No, he's eating better. He's taking better care of himself. He's getting healthier. He's just on the mend with this foot issue, and he should be back up and hypothetically running in the next couple of weeks. So he'll be back in studio and doing the show with me, I believe, in a week or so here.
Well, listen, Tim, it's not the same without you, my friend, and
hey,
we'll
I'm
try and
right
muddle
here,
on without
Richard.
you.
I'm right here.
You're good at this, Dave. You're incredible at this, but you ain't Tim Dennis.
That is true. I'm no Tim Dennis, sir. Let's talk about this book, because you've written this book with a co-author, and I'd like you to introduce her because she has the first-hand story for us on this. Who did you bring with you tonight, Richard?
Thank you, Dave. Well, my co-author's name is Vanessa Mitchell, and she is the owner and longtime tenant of an old witches' prison called the Cage, and she's joining us now at 4:30 in the morning from the other side of the pond, the UK. Good morning, Vanessa.
Good morning. How are you guys?
We are excellent, Vanessa. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you. No problem.
This is fascinating. How did this story come to your attention, Richard?
Well, I'd been looking for another book project to write after World's Most Haunted Hospitals, and I'd wanted to settle on a single case. And I just heard so much about the Cage, seen it on a television documentary called Great British Ghosts, and the idea of a haunted prison for witches, or at least those accused of witchcraft, it just almost sold itself to me. I was fascinated. So I did some digging, saw some newspaper articles, and reached out to Vanessa, and she said, you should come over here. You should experience this place for yourself. And she was trusting enough and kind enough to basically hand me the keys to her house and say, here you go, see you in a week. And so I moved in with, it sounds like a joke, a Catholic priest and 2 other paranormal investigators to see what we could uncover.
Vanessa, prior to living in this home, did you ever believe in the paranormal? Was that part of your world?
Yeah, I'd always believed. I've seen ghosts and since I was a small child. And I'd lived in a property previously in the same village that was haunted. So I did believe in it. Having said that, I don't know if I believed in such an active, hostile, constant haunting I experienced. I know ghosts are out there. I know it. I've seen them before. I know there's lots of paranormal activity, but this was something that I never thought could exist, to be honest.
Well, break us in slowly, Vanessa. Tell me a little bit about the experiences you had before this location. What type of things had you seen and experienced?
Since a small child, I've always seen ghosts. I've got the sense, I always had the sense, the feeling that they were there. I just always knew from a young child that there were, I'd see things fly across a room and lots of physical things moving, always since as a child and as a teenager and a young adult. So I always knew it existed right from, I always say from when I had conscious thought, but I reckon in reality, I saw my first ghost at around 4 or 5 years old. So from a young child, just always, if they're there, I'll see them. Not all the time, of course, because I've been seeing them everywhere.
How did you know that was a ghost at the age of 4 or 5? Were you cognizant of it at that point? Yeah, because it was, because she went into the air. There was this very old-fashioned little girl with tartan on doing a sewing. She was sewing, and she was wearing tartan and lace. And when I was trying to talk to her, and then she just kind of slowly looked up at me and just kind of disappeared slowly into the air. Now, it doesn't matter what age you are. You know that is not right. That is not normal. You just know. No. Is this a gift that your family shares, this ability to sense and see the supernatural? No, I'm not aware. I know my niece is the same as me, but before that, I'm not sure where it came from, to be honest. I know I'm descendant from Romany gypsies from generations back, Spanish-Irish gypsies, but I don't know, to be honest. I'm not aware if there is. All right, well, take me back, and we're going to get into the story with Richard investigating, but let's start to talk about this location, this historic cottage in Essex. How did this come to your attention? Well, it's in St. Osyth, and it was the village I lived in as a child, and the same road I lived in as a child, my childhood house, there was a little old witch's cottage that we used to, we used to know as the witch's cottage, called the Cage, and it used to be a medieval prison in the old days. And it was, I'd come home. I was working away, and I came home for a visit, and I'd seen it was up for sale. And for some reason, I just had to have it. I just got completely single track mind about it, and I just knew in my heart I just had to buy this little place. All right. And growing up in that area, had you heard stories of the haunting of this location? No, I hadn't, to be honest. I don't think I really had at all. I think people thought it was a weird house or a scary house. I knew that somebody had just killed themselves in there. When I was buying it, I knew a week before that somebody had hung themselves in there. But no, I can't say. Wait a minute, Vanessa. A week before you purchased it, someone hung themselves in there, or you found out a week before? 6 months. Okay. Yeah, no, about 6 months before I brought it, somebody else was living there, and they hung themselves in there. So, of course, there was rumours there, but I can't say I ever. No, it was never. Oh my God, don't walk past that house like it is now. No, it was never. No, it didn't have a really big reputation for being haunted. A strange house, strange activity maybe, but no, I wasn't aware I was buying a really haunted house at all. Well, knowing that you had the ability to see and interact with spirits, when you found out that somebody had murdered themselves, or murdered, I guess, had taken their own lives in that house, were you reticent at all at that point in getting involved in this, or did that not quell your desire at all? Do you know what? I look back now, I didn't even think about it. I didn't take it into consideration at all. I don't know why I didn't now I look back. I was just so single-track minded about buying it. And I don't know, also, I don't even know why I felt like that at the time, because I didn't look at one other house. I had a good budget to buy this house. I had a good deposit, and I didn't even look at another house. Just for some reason, something in my brain
I need to have that house. And no, the fact that he just killed him, you see, to me, I didn't know him, I'd never met him. So it wasn't personal to me. And I didn't really consider, having said that, I think he was the least of the problems. I mean, the house is so haunted and so active by other things. I don't think he is the main problem in there.
Wow, you've that's something, because I know that would have scared a lot of people off, or at least made them pause in this, because the death was so recent in the home. And
I know,
being sensitive, I would be afraid that would be somebody. Just out of curiosity, have you run into that spirit in the home since you've moved in?
I believe so. I mean, I don't live there anymore. I've not lived in the house for over 10 years. It's unlivable. You can't live in it. But, I believe I have, yeah. But, because I'd seen ghosts, I just thought, well, if he's there, you see, because there's a difference in between seeing a ghost and there's a difference being involved in an active, relentless, hostile haunting. It's two totally different things. I can live, listen, especially in England, a lot of places you go old. And you see ghosts, and it is what it is. I was always used to that. And I thought, well, if he walked past the room one day, it wouldn't bother me. But what I had in there was completely different from anything I'd ever experienced before in my life. So it was a total different ballgame.
All right. You said this was just a totally vibrant and active haunting. After you purchased this, how soon did you realize there was major activity taking place in this home?
I realised that I wasn't alone literally the very first day, but the activity grew and grew and grew. Just the little things would happen for the start. Things would fly across the room, doors would open, taps were always running, the electrics were always going up and down and not functioning properly. And the shadow people, always saw them, but it got hostile and aggressive and violent over a period of time. To be honest, I think I knew I was in trouble pretty soon on, but the end result was far worse than I ever could have imagined. I don't think I ever believed that it could get as bad as it did.
Were you moving in alone? Were you going in with children, a spouse? Tell me a little bit about that living situation.
Well, my friend Nicole, she moved in with me as a flatmate. Okay. So I moved in with a friend initially. So, yeah, I wasn't alone when I first went there.
The shadow people that you would witness, were they moving around in front of your view, or were they just fleeting images caught in the corner of your eye?
Oh, in front, behind, to the side. They were bold. There was, it wasn't a situation where you thought, I thought I saw something, or, in your peripheral vision. It wasn't that. They were bold. They were there. And I think they really, really wanted to be noticed. They really wanted attention right from the word go.
When you realized that this was more than just ghosts knocking about, what was the first thing that captured your attention that you realized you might be in danger?
Oh, God. I thought when I was attacked, there's so many incidences when the blood splatters happened. I think when I was physically attacked for the first time, of course, that's a different level. Because then something you can't see can physically hurt you. And there's one thing from being terrorised from things flying across the room and doors slamming, although that is horrifically frightening. But then when you're physically attacked, I was pushed over, I was hit really, really hard by something I couldn't see. And in no circumstances, actually, I couldn't see anything at all. And I wished I could have seen them. So I knew what I was fighting. So I knew what I was up against, but I couldn't. These attacks came completely out of the blue. On one occasion, I was brushing my teeth at about 7:30 in the morning, getting ready for work, to go to work. And I was bending over the bathroom sink, as you do, brushing my teeth, and I got hit so hard on my bum. The toothbrush flew up in the air. I literally screamed with pain because it was so hard. That was when I was living there on my own. There was nobody there. And I think that first time I thought, what the hell is going on here? And I think that was the first time I really began to fear for my physical safety. By then, I already knew mentally I was in trouble. I knew whatever was in the house had, I don't want to say got me, but I do, because that's definitely how it felt.
When you were hit, could you define what hit you? I mean, did it feel like a hand? Did it feel like a board? What was the sensation?
To me, it felt like a hand, but it was a hard hit. It was a hard stinging. It was a proper forceful. This thing was strong. It wasn't just the kind of tap on the bum you'd get from a boyfriend or a friend or anything. This was a hard, aggressive whack.
Did it leave any markings behind?
To be honest, I don't think I ever looked. I think, I just remember just getting my work clothes on and getting out of the house quick.
Did you?
It's funny the way you react to things.
Right. Well, I was going to say, how did you react? Did you turn around and yell, "Knock it off"? Did you, were you cowering in the corner for half an hour like I would be doing if some unseen hand smacked my butt? What was your initial reaction?
I vividly remember just standing there for a couple of seconds in absolute shock. And then, of course, your brain kicks in. Is there someone in the house? Could I have felt it another way? Is there, is it a body issue I've got that has made me feel pain all of a sudden? You always try to, and I think it's human instinct, you just rationalise it and you kind of work out, was it this, was it that, was it this? I think I did that for a few seconds. More than a few seconds actually, and then I thought, Jesus, I need to, and then your brain understand, and you think, no, I know what it is. I just remember getting into the bedroom, getting my stuff, and just getting to work, just getting out there as fast as I could.
All right, so your first real attack was this slap. What? Yeah. And how did it escalate from there? How often were you being attacked, and what other type of actions were being taken against you?
I would be in my bed. There was a lot worse stuff. For one example, I had friends coming round. He was a sergeant major in Afghanistan at the time, and his job was to process the Taliban. And his wife, my best friend Kirsty, I've known for years, she runs the cancer ward in the hospital. And they'd come over. He was on leave. And we went through to the kitchen to get a cup of tea. We came back. We sat down in the front room. And within the 5 or 10 minutes that took, in the lobbyway and the hallway, blood splatters had just appeared, just turned up. Now, the lobbyway, it had kind of the wooden flooring at the time. We sat back down and Neil said, Ness, what's all that blood over there? Now, bearing in mind, they had just walked through that exact part of the house. That part of the house is very small. If the blood was there before, they certainly would have walked through it without a doubt.
Right.
In fact, it's so small, that little walking area, you'd have to walk single file through there. And I kind of ignored him from the start because I'm talking to Kirsty and I thought, well, there isn't, so don't worry about that. And then he got up and he went over to investigate. And, of course, that's when me and Kirsty, now, bearing in mind, Kirsty's a cancer nurse. She's a blood nurse. She's a leukemia nurse. And she said, Ness, that's blood. And it struck me as interesting that after it, Kirsty said that she'd actually had a go at Neil and said, why did you do it? Because he was actually feeling it within his fingers. And she said, why did you touch that? You're trained. You should never touch blood without gloves. And I remember thinking, well, what? And she was that convinced it was blood. So Neil started kind of checking the windows, checking the doors, checking if the door had been left open. Did a bird fly in that was bleeding? Was it an animal? How could this have got there? How could it have got there? And he's trying to work this out. We all are. And he just said, Ness, what the hell's going on in this house? What is going, because this blood splatters had appeared. That was one freaky thing. But when I think, after I'd only been in the house a few weeks, you'll have to excuse me because I've got about 3 years worth of going back and forward with what happened. Right. But not long after I first moved in, I got in from work and I'd seen this bit of paper on the kitchen side. And it was an A4 bit of paper and I picked it up and it was the guy who'd killed himself in there 6 months before, death certificate. And I thought, well, so anyway, so I read it and he'd killed himself just before Halloween. And I'm reading this thing and I thought, where on earth has that come from? Anyway, so I just thought, Nicole must have found it. So then when Nicole would later come in, I said, all right, where'd you find this? She said, what? And again, she was the same as me. She had absolutely no idea where it come from. Now, Nicole's a real scaredy cat. I mean, Nicole's just a blow into a brown paper bag if she sees a spider. She has panic attacks and everything. So, I knew she wasn't the type to play tricks anyway, because I've known her since we were like 6 or 7. So, of course, then again, you do the next step. You look, has somebody broken in? Has somebody got through a window? Has this been put here to scare us? Have we got any enemy? You go through all of those logical stuff all the time. The thing that struck me about it was this death certificate looked like it was brand new off the printing press. It didn't have a mark. It didn't have a scratch. Nothing. Now, after the guy had killed himself in there, another couple brought the house straight away. They only lasted in the house about 6 months. And then I brought it. So I thought, well, had it fallen down the side? Did wind blow it up from somewhere? And then I thought, well, if that was the case, surely it would have been a bit dusty or something. Anyway, it was a complete mystery. So everyone that used to come around the house, our friends, say, look at this, because I was absolutely blown away by it. And nobody could believe it.
Right, but more importantly, Vanessa, he hung himself. They sold the house. Who was he living there by himself? No, he was living there with his wife. Okay, so she might have had a copy of the death certificate. So this is what I'm going to get onto. So what happened was, after it got out in the English media about this death certificate, she actually contacted me and she said, "Listen, I understand that his death is a part of the history of the cage now," but she said, "Why are you saying you have a death certificate?" She said, "It's impossible." She said, because they were in the process of splitting up. When she found him hanging, she left the house. She never went back in. Her friends packed it up for her. And months later, the death certificate was sent to her in a different address. He was adopted. He had no other family. Every one of his family was dead. He had no brothers or sisters. He had no one else. And she said, "You couldn't have had it." And I said, "Well, I'm telling you, I did." Anyway, she came around the house to meet me, and we had a long chat about it. And I said, "Listen, you need to ask," because we live in the same village, although I'd never knew her. I said, "You need to ask this person, that person, this person, because all these people saw this death certificate, so I can tell you and guarantee you." And apart from that, why would I make it up? I mean, it's horrifying, especially a suicide. I wouldn't know anyone to be as cruel as to start making rumours like that if it wasn't true. She. And then she, and she believed me, and it just turned up. And so going back, as a child, I'd seen ghosts and stuff, but I didn't realise they could materialise things. I think this was the start of me understanding truly what spirit can do. Right. I think they call it apportation, when things just appear out of nowhere. Yeah, I've learned that since, but at the time I wouldn't even consider it to be, for a while I did eventually, because there's no choice, because when you think in your rational brain, is it this, is it this, is it, and when it's none of those things, you have to just understand and accept it is what it is. Right. Well, that is certainly a way to get your attention. So something in this house was going hardcore to get your attention. Start to talk to me about the and don't worry, Richard, I know you're there. We're going to get to you. I want to get to your experiences and coming in, but I just need to know some of this history. Tell me about this place. Why would it be so active? What was this home prior to it being a residence? Well, it was a medieval prison. And of course, in England in those days, you were hung, you were executed for stealing a loaf of bread. It's opposite Priory Lands, which is in the old days in England, you had kings and queens of towns and areas. And so it's similar to a castle, and it would have been, and it was, for the wealthy. So the village is ancient, very ancient anyway. But so, of course, the cage was a local prison. But, of course, in the 1500s, the witchcraft trials, basically Queen Elizabeth had come to the Priory, and she had, the witchcraft trial just was really picking up speed here in England. And one of the Darcy brothers who owned the Priory thought, okay, I want to impress the Queen. I'm going to capture women in the village, say they're witches. And he did. And one very famous
case Ursula Kemp. He also, he got her. The history is quite long and complicated, but the very short version is she'd been accused by other women in the village of being a witch. So he got her interrogated. He also got her little son, Tom, who was about 6 years old, and he basically said, "You need to, say at trial your mother's a witch, and then we'll go easy on you." Well, of course, he's 6. He was terrified. He testified against his mother. And she was found to be a witch, which she was going to be anyway. In the process of this, she had said, well, okay then, well, there's that person, that person, that person. So in the end, 13 women were kept in the cage until their execution. Some were found not guilty, some died in the prison, some were hung. But along with the witchcraft element, you also have, obviously, the other prisoners that have been there, and of course natural deaths, over centuries, where people would die in their house and they would stay in the house before their body was taken for days. It's layers and layers and layers of history in the house.
And I get all of that, but none of the women were none of the witches or women were put to death in that prison, though, correct?
No, not as far as to be honest, we don't know. There's no records. We can't find any. It's strange. My sister is a historian and she can find records on every single place in the village except for the cage, my house. The truth is we actually don't know. There was no police in those days. They could have been executing in there. We never would have known. We're never going to know. All we know now is what mediums tell us. So the truth is we just don't know. But going to medieval England, I think there's, and what I feel from the understanding the house, a lot of people died in there or were killed in there without a shadow of a doubt.
And how long did you live in this home?
3 years.
3 years? With that kind of activity taking place, you were in there for 3 years.
Yeah, but I had no choice. It's like people say, I watch these paranormal programs all the time and I sit there, and I did, and I sat there and say, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you leave? But listen, in reality of life, it's not as simple as that. By the end of my time at the cage, I had a young baby. I didn't have any money left. Unless somebody was going to knock on my door and say, here, Ness, there's £1,000 for rent deposit. There's £1,000 for your upfront rent. You can't, I had a mortgage. It's not as simple as that. But not only that, I think the house had got me by then. I became I changed so much. I was completely trapped in that house, completely. I look back now and think, God, Vanessa, why didn't you do something earlier? And it's easy for people to say, I'd do it myself, screaming at the people on the TV, well, why don't you leave then? You'd leave at any cost. But you think you'd leave at any cost, but in reality, it doesn't work like that. Something in that house had me there. It changed me. In the end, I was just living in the top bedroom. I didn't use any of the house at all. I was so terrified. I was living in one room. I even had a potty underneath the bed because I couldn't go. I couldn't go out of the house. I couldn't go to the toilet at night. The house consumed everything about me. And I look back now, and it's crazy because I had a really good job, quite a high-powered job. I was in a very competitive male-dominated industry. I'm a sorted female. I'm not a lily liver. And I look back at my time, and something had got me in there. It was only when my baby was under threat that, to be honest, something in my head said to me, Ness, you've just got to get out of here because your baby's going to be hurt.
It is, just so you know, Vanessa and Richard, it is late at night here in Minnesota as I record this episode with you. And there have been a few times when you've started to tell the creepiest things. We are having the most wicked thunderstorm outside. So as you're telling me this, as I sit in this low light setting and you start telling me the creepier aspects, I start hearing rolling outside my window. So you're effectively getting in my head as well with this. 3 years you lived in this. Yes?
Can I just say as well, when I'd left the house,
right.
The lady whose husband had killed himself, when she came to see me, she gave me the documents of the people that lived there previously, I think going back about 200 years, which she'd never passed on when the house was sold. Anyway, she gave them to me. My sister, being the historian, examined and looked through them very carefully. And it turns out that for the last, I think we've got for 250 years, that house has been up for sale on average every 3 years. Now, my sister, being a historian, is saying, well, it's not possible. It couldn't have been, because you didn't have estate agents then. You would keep the same property within the family for generations and generations. Now, one example of this was a man had bought the house for £150 and sold it weeks later for £100. Now, of course, 200 years ago, £50 was a lot of money. So my point is that throughout history of the records that I do have, this house has been up for sale on average every 3 years. Now, I only lived in there for 3 years. I've owned it now for many, many years, like 10, 13 years. But so even for the skeptics that think, oh, well, no, she's a lunatic, well, all the other people weren't as well. There's something about that house, and the maximum stay is 3 years. And it's proved scientifically on paper that's the case.
Now, you said that it had you. For our listeners and myself, what does it mean the house had you? What was it? Was it breaking you down? Did it make you... I mean, obviously you were afraid of what was going on there, but most people would think, okay, that means you want to get out. But you're saying that you almost felt trapped by this home.
Yeah, I was absolutely trapped in it. There's no other way. I look back at it now, and I kind of knew I was at the time. I don't know. I think it got into my head, into my brain. What was there was dark, was evil, and I'm going to say that. I know it's a strong word, but I mean it. There's something there that's really bad. And I put it this way. Listen, I'm just going to be honest. I believe that if a guy that killed himself had lived somewhere else, he wouldn't have done it. And I've said that. I don't believe he'd have taken his own life if he'd lived in a normal property.
So you think it was the supernatural that pushed him to that point?
Yeah, I do. And that's going to sound crazy, but I don't care. I've lived in the house, and I know something. If you can imagine you're in this house and something's always in your ear, go yourself, go yourself, go yourself, go yourself, go yourself. That's how it began to feel. That's certainly how it felt to the end. And he would have felt, you see, the thing is, I'm quite protected. I believe I'm protected by spirit. I believe I've done from a child. I believe if I wasn't me, I may have done the same thing. There's something in that house that's dark and wants to keep you there. It's very hard for me to understand, for me to explain what I mean by got me.
No, I think that really painted the picture well. I think we understand quite a bit more on that. It was telling you, though, to kill yourself?
That's how it felt. That's to me, it's in your head. That's how it became. That's how it felt. It's hard to it did,
All right, we need to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue to hear about this chilling experience and what actually got you out of that house and what it's been like since you left. Richard Estep has gone in and investigated this location, hands-on, going in to try to prove or disprove the claims that were coming from the spirits of the cage. We'll do that when we return here on the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.
Beyond the Darkness.
Welcome back to Beyond the Darkness. When a single mother, Vanessa Mitchell, moved into a historic cottage in Essex, she had no idea that a paranormal nightmare was about to unfold. The cottage, known as the Cage, used to imprison those accused of witchcraft back in the 1500s. From her first day living there, Vanessa saw apparitions walk through her room, heard ghostly growls, and something even struck her and pushed her with invisible hands. Vanessa Mitchell is here to talk with us, and investigator, researcher, and author Richard Estep with us as well, who had a chance to go in and investigate this. I want to know, Vanessa, before we go to Richard's side of the story and his investigation, what was the final defining moment that you knew, I need to move out of this house?
The last few months there, I was completely, as I said, locked away in my bedroom. I didn't use the rest of the house at all. But one day I couldn't set up the ironing board in my bedroom. The room was too small and I had no work clothes. So I thought, and I really had to think hard about this, just to go down, because obviously the last, 6 months of living there, I'd had a baby and I knew the house wasn't safe for him. So everywhere I went in the house, I would normally take him with me. Anyway, he was asleep and I thought, he was in his cot upstairs next to my bed. I thought, right, Vanessa, just go down, ironing. It will take you 2 seconds. I only needed to iron like 3 things. Leave him there, leave him on his own, which I'd never done before. I knew I couldn't do that. It was impossible for me to do that, to leave him on his own. So I thought, right, just leg it down. I went down, and actually the ironing board was in the cage room. And so I got some clothes quickly. I started to iron. And then Jessie had these little Thomas the Tank Engine toys, which you turn on, and battery operated. And I'm doing this ironing quickly, and these toys, these Thomas the Tank Engines, have started going off by themselves, circling around my feet, circling around the bottom of the ironing board, like 3 or 4 of them all at once. And I thought, no. My initial thought, I was really pissed off with myself. People say, how did you feel initially at that moment? My first thing was I was so angry with myself because I shouldn't have been out of that room. I knew something would happen. I should never have left that bedroom. I quickly turned off the iron, grabbed my clothes, and went to run upstairs. But it's like these little windy stairs, and you have to open a door to get to the stairs. And as I've opened the door and about to go up the stairs, there's a man standing at the top of the stairs. But the other ghosts I'd seen in there were old-fashioned. They had old-fashioned clothing. This man wasn't. He had on like brown chino-type trousers and a white shirt. And he was standing in between. He was right next to my son's cot at the top of the landing. And I think it was then, although I was literally near to a breakdown, I mean, I can't tell you, this house had got me. And I thought then, something in my head kicked in, right, he's in between you and your son. You need to get out. You've got to protect your son. And that was probably the final thing, to be honest. After hundreds and hundreds of things that happened over 3 years, that was the final thing that made me leave.
You decide finally you're going to get out of there. And this house has a grip on you, Vanessa. Does it start fighting back when it realizes you're trying to get out?
I was out of there within a few days. My friend had said, listen, just come here. There's a room in my house. But the interesting, when I left, I had activity. Something had followed me, certainly for a couple of weeks, because the house I moved into, which was like at least half an hour drive away from the cage, stuff had followed me that was happening for a good couple of weeks. Then it went away, and then it just stopped, and life went back to normal again. But I think when I left, I'd left quickly. So to be honest, the activity was so active and hostile every day that it would have had to have killed me to have made it even worse. It was so bad anyway. I didn't notice a step up within those 3-4 days when I was packing to go, because it was just so bad. The last day was bad. The thundering from the top of the smash, smash, smash coming from upstairs, and the heavy clumping down the stairs. And there was a man. There was a man in the upstairs, again, a man in the upstairs bedroom that caused that. So, yeah, he didn't want me to go. It was angry.
After 3 years, Vanessa finally has enough. She realizes this is nothing that she wants to be a part of. Her safety, her child's safety is at risk, and she decides to get out. And this is where paranormal investigator Richard Estep moves in and chronicles what happens at this location. Richard, you hear about this case, and you and I know as researchers and investigators, a lot of times these cases are really overblown, and maybe she bumped her butt, and as time has progressed, the story has grown, and it went from a bump to now a full-on smacking and terrifying. Were you kind of conscious of that going into this? Were you afraid that maybe these stories were just overblown and that there was no way it could be this active?
I'm always conscious in any case at all where there's any publicity. You would be mad to not consider the possibility that you're being taken for a ride. and I'm sure Vanessa will take no offense if I say that, you always consider what the motives are. But then you also have to look at the number of witnesses that are reporting similar phenomena. And this is a good time to give a shout out to a gentleman called John Fraser, who is with the SPR, the Society for Psychical Research, I believe, in the UK. And John actually studied the commonality of things that people report in the cage. People that have never met Vanessa or, have just come to visit the cage and they've met her for the first time that evening. And the smacks, the phenomena, the physical stuff is actually fairly well documented with multiple witnesses. So,
yeah.
Another thing is that, as you know, Dave, I make my living as a paramedic. I get lied to for a living, and I wasn't getting that vibe when I met Vanessa at all, that she was trying to sell me a bill of goods. And I watched her body language. I don't know if I've told you this until now, actually, Vanessa, but I was watching her body language around the cage, and she was always hyper aware of where she was in location to it. She wouldn't come in after dark. She flatly refused to do that. So on the couple of occasions that she did come over to the cage at night, we would actually meet her in the pub across the street. And even then, she would choose a seat where she had something between her and the house. She would not pick a seat where she could see it through a window. And when we did get her in there during the daytime, her head was on a swivel all the time, whether she knew we were watching her or not. So it was interesting watching her reaction to the house and her body language in there. But ultimately what convinced me was that she'd said, I'll give you the keys. Why don't you move in and find out for yourself? And that's an offer that I just couldn't resist.
Right. Mm. Now, how did you go about deciding who you would take in on this investigation, Richard?
Well, the first thing was we were going from the States, and I'd wanted to take a fellow paranormal investigator that I work with fairly regularly. His name's Father Stephen Wiedner. He's a Catholic priest and a paranormal investigator. In fact, you should just have him on the show, Dave, for the sake of some of the cases he's done. The man is an absolute legend. Very, very smart, very, very wise, very, very funny. So Stephen agreed to jump on a plane with me and come over to the cage because I called him and said, Steve, old haunted witches prison in England. How do you fancy that in February? And he said, I'm there. And so I picked also two of my friends from the UK that had never done an investigation before. And my logic there was we have the investigation side covered. Now I'd like to see a couple of people that have never done this before and what is their reaction to this location and to the phenomena. And the cage is actually a relatively small property, and it's manageable enough that a small team can still cover it, especially as the house is now wired with security cameras, so you can monitor it fairly easily. And the other thing is, Dave, you've probably forgotten, but we also took you.
That was the investigation that you used the Ovilus in.
Yeah, so for your listeners, we were sitting there, and again, it was a dark and stormy night. It was terrific. We turned on the Ovilus, and we heard your voice speaking to us. It was kind of surreal, so we made sure that we tweeted you from the cage room itself to let you know you were there in spirit.
That's right. Wow, I didn't realize that was the location that you were investigating. Yeah, that's fun. It's funny to take that tool on an investigation with friends when I go out, and I keep forgetting my voice is the official voice for that Ovilus. And all of a sudden I started hearing my voice calling from another room. I'm like, what the hell was that? Oh, yeah, the Ovilus.
Dave, I would never refer to you as that tool. I promise. That's really harsh.
Well, you're the only one. You're the only one who wouldn't refer to me as a tool. You've got this chance to go in and investigate this location. How much of the history did you have? How detailed of the history did you have before going in?
I did research it quite heavily, and there are some cases you like to go in blind, but in this case, I wanted to know as much as I possibly could. So purely reading on the history of the witch trials in England and the parallels to Salem, which would occur later in the US, looking at what happened in the village of St. Osyth, and the legend of St. Osyth, the saint who gave the village her name, is a fascinating story, and it's not one we have time to go into, but suffice it to say, Osyth was a local girl that had her head cut off by the Vikings, and then her body returned to knock on the church door in the village, if you believe the old legend. So just the entire area is steeped in this haunted history, and it was an absolute delight to look at it. It really, really was, to delve into it. Vanessa could tell you more than I about this subject, but the body of a witch was dug up in a back garden. Isn't that right, Vanessa, in St. Osyth?
Yeah, it turned out actually through carbon dating, because they spent a lot of money on the skeleton. They turned out it actually was a male. It wasn't a female. But many bodies of many skeletons have been discovered over the years. I know people that have found them in that back gardens and just put a shed on top or just covered them up because they don't want the drama of the police coming and everything like that. It's it happens a lot here.
Well, yeah, England is basically one giant burial ground. I was just watching a special on that, and they said, you don't realize you can't go more than probably 10 yards without bumping into another burial spot.
And just to make it even more fascinating, Dave, so the cage is on a fairly busy road, but on the back end of the house, you have a long alley, and that's called Coffin Alley. So called because that's where the undertakers for hundreds of years had taken bodies for burial, for interment down in the churchyard. So there was this constant stream of funerals being taken by hand, if you will, past the back end of the cage also, which that related to one of the apparitions that one of the witnesses had seen in there. She'd seen this funeral procession actually moving past, this ghostly procession. So the eyewitness testimony was just fascinating and varied, and there was a lot of it. And as Vanessa said, you look at the trustworthiness of people such as senior non-commissioned officers in the British Army. These are not fanciful people. These are people, you get shot at for a living, you tend to become somewhat of a realist, and this is not a man that's going to be taken for a fool. And I talked to other paranormal teams that had investigated. I talked to members of the public that had been in. I talked to Vanessa's friends as well. Or Vanessa hooked me up with some people. And again, they're all telling very, very similar stories. So it's possible to say, again, with no offense to Vanessa, maybe one person, two people, five people, this could be fraud or it could be a mass delusion. But when you start counting into the 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 witnesses, you have to think that there's more to it.
All right. Well, tell me about your investigation, Richard. In going in, how long did you stay there?
So we stayed there for a working week, which was basically 5.5 days. We got off the plane at London Heathrow. We drove straight to the cage, and Stephen and I moved in. So we were alone there that first night while waiting for our other two investigators. And Vanessa showed us around in daylight. She said she wanted to get out before darkness fell, and we had a very quick whistle-stop tour of the house. And we didn't realize it, but we actually caught something in the first half hour there. We both have these digital voice recorders that are wristbands. You know the EVP wristbands, Dave?
Right.
You basically, it looks like a Fitbit. You turn it on and it records everything that goes on around you for 24 hours. And for evidence review, those of the listeners that investigate, I really recommend turning that off before you hit the restroom. Anyway.
Well, you'll get EVP then.
Yes, you really. Oh, boo! That was awesome. So Vanessa's giving us a tour of the house. We go up to the top floor, so we go up this very steep staircase. We're on the landing, and it's kind of dark and gloomy inside the cage. This is Britain in February, so the sky is very, very gray and overcast and dull. And so I say, Vanessa, is there a light up here on the landing? And when you listen to the EVP, which crucially was picked up by my recorder and Stephen's, you hear an old woman's voice, very croaky, very raspy, and it says, yes, in the bathroom. And then you hear Vanessa immediately, just as we hear the word bathroom, gives her answer. So we know, obviously, it's not Vanessa talking. That she was the only female in the house, but this old woman's voice came through on both of our voice recorders, answering my question directly.
So this is just in the walkthrough.
That was just in the initial walkthrough, which was quite hurried because, frankly, Vanessa could not wait to get out of there. And she handed me, a complete stranger, she'd never met me before in person, handed me the keys to her place and said, good luck, I hope you're okay. And we settled in for the first night of that week at the cage.
Vanessa, I know our listeners are going to want to know, if you wanted to get out that badly, why did you move out and still keep the cage? What was the theory behind that?
I was going to get onto this point. When I was living there, I put the house up for sale. It did not sell. It didn't sell. When I left the house, I rented the house out, and the tenants, two different sets of tenants, didn't stay longer than 2-3 months. The house has been up for sale for years. It won't sell. I tried at the time to sell the house. I tried to move on from it, but it's not ready to let me go yet. I just also want to make the point that when talking about, how this all happened, when I left the house, I locked it up. I literally boarded it up and left it alone. It was only a year or 2 years later, somebody came to me and said, can I do a paranormal investigation? I never courted that side of it at all. I didn't go to the press. It kind of found me. I don't want people to think I've made up this great big story to get on TV. It was not like that. I locked up the house. I knew I couldn't rent it out anymore because it wasn't safe. The tenants were being attacked. One very badly was nearly choked to death. I thought it's not safe. So I had to pay the mortgage on a house I couldn't live in. It was still up for sale. And it was only later a local paranormal group said, we've heard this house is terrible. Can we investigate? I said, yeah, do it. But I never go back in the house like Richard said. I'll be polite with Richard, and I did. And I said, okay, babe, I'll give you 10 minutes. Next time you need to be meeting me in the pub. The house terrifies me.
Richard, let's put our money together. I think we've got a nice little cottage we can visit only in the coldest, creepiest parts of England's seasonal times. What do you think?
A nice little holiday rental, huh, Dave?
Right.
And,
a dead and breakfast, yeah.
Oh, you were just awful with the puns tonight.
Well,
and I also, I went into St. Otis. We had to go buy supplies, so I would go into the village, and I talked to people. And you get talking and I'd say, oh, I'm staying at the Cage. And this happened with taxi drivers, cab drivers that were taking us to go get food and things like that. And some people would say, oh, yeah, that place, the haunted house, it's overblown. But a lot of them would also say things like, yeah, we crossed the road to avoid that place. We won't walk by on the same side. There were motorists that have driven past and seen the figure of an emaciated old woman looking out of the upstairs bedroom window. And in fact, Vanessa was accused of putting a mannequin there, a Halloween kind of mannequin, which of course she never did. So there are more than a few casual witnesses in the village that have had their own scares going past the house.
That's fascinating. You've got all of these people having these experiences. You're kind of in this mindset now, Richard, of all that's going on there, and now you have to spend 5 days in this place. You've got your little team. Mm-hmm. Are you worried knowing that one person that rented it was almost choked to death? I mean, are there any concerns on your part?
I've done some interesting and some fear-inducing locations. I mean, just last year, I spent 3 days living at Fox Hollow Farm. I'm sure you're familiar with that location.
Yes, we are, sure.
Right. So, and there's Asylum 49 and other places where I've definitely had a dose of the fear, but it's a lot easier to do it with good camaraderie and in good company. We also stayed very busy and very active, conducting investigation for as long as we could stay awake. So keeping busy helps. But I do think that when you know of the haunted reputation of a building and you know the stories, it does predispose you to want to misinterpret every creak of a floorboard as a footstep if you're not careful. So we did a lot of ruling out. And one thing that I'm very militant about is tracking drafts. So I would hang pieces of paper and check if there is a draft coming through the door. And that proved to be essential. Actually, one day when Leslie, one of our investigators, was outside having a cigarette, and the door slammed pretty violently, shutting her outside. And I checked. There were no drafts coming through, and the rear porch of the Cage is shielded, so there was no way for drafts to kind of do what happened there. And that was just one of several very odd things that happened during the investigation.
At any point during this investigation, did you or any of the team feel like you were in danger?
I don't know if danger is the specific word I would use. Certainly, Leslie, again, one of my non-investigators, one of the visitors, she jumped out of a chair which was positioned right next to the fireplace and said that she'd suddenly gone icy cold, absolutely chilled to the bone, and she began to shiver and then burst into tears, and she had just this tremendous sense of sadness and was overcome by this feeling. So that wasn't so much danger, but it was a very real emotional response. And when I interviewed other visitors after this investigation, another team, they'd had exactly the same experience in exactly that same chair. But when they went in on this particular evening, the problem they'd had was that one of them upstairs actually began trying to throw himself into a fireplace. He said he felt that he'd done something dreadfully wrong and he had to die for it. So I think we kind of got off lightly in terms of feeling threatened.
Yeah, I guess you did. Not setting yourself on fire or throwing yourself from a window is probably a pretty tame response for this. How about visual perspective? When you're there, Richard, are you seeing anything?
I did not see anything in the realm of an apparition or anything along those lines. I'm not one of those investigators that gives credence to orbs. So when I'm looking on the monitors and I'm seeing all these wonderful quote-unquote orbs, it's pretty much dust for the most part. So I don't have any good visual phenomena. One thing, though, that really did impress me was the night I went to meet Vanessa briefly to give her an update in the pub, I got a text message on my phone from the crew who was still in the house, and they said, "Richard, are you remotely connected into your laptop?" And I said, "No, in fact, we don't have Wi-Fi in the cage. There's no computer network. I couldn't be connected to my laptop. Why?" They said, "We're taking some video you've just got to see." And what was happening was this. I keep notes on a log. It's a Microsoft Word document. I always bring a laptop to an investigation. Whenever anyone experiences anything, I have them enter it in the log. So we'd got some good entries in the log. And the only way I can describe it is that something or someone was scrolling through the entries in my log. So manipulating the cursor, moving it down, scrolling the screen downwards. And as tempting as it is to say it's a problem with the computer, it's a glitch, something along those lines, it's the same PC that I'm Skyping into you with now. I've had this thing for 5 years. It has never behaved like this before or since leaving the cage. And I have the video footage of that, which does look quite weird.
Isn't that interesting that they're manipulating technology that would have been totally out of their realm?
Well, one of the things, Dave, that is fairly commonly reported at the cage is problems with technology. Car trouble. This fascinated me. I spoke to a number of witnesses that have just parked at the cage to visit, and they've had issues with their cars, some of them requiring some major, serious replacement work. One happened on a BMW of a witness, an almost brand new BMW that required the thing to get some extensive remodeling in the engine. Fortunately, it was still under warranty. But probably the most interesting story is, and this was very nearly tragic, I believe it was last year, just as we were finishing work on the book, but a driver lost control of their vehicle right outside the cage and slammed into the front wall at high speed. Fortunately, nobody was hurt inside the house at the time.
What about the driver?
Vanessa, you'd have to answer that.
He was okay. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't under the influence of anything. He just drove straight into the house. The angle was strange though, because I don't know how he did it, but he must have turned a 360. He didn't obviously drive in my house at 55 miles an hour deliberately, but I don't know how on earth he'd have done it. It's weird. It's just the house. It's just negative. It must have pulled him in there. God knows. But he was fine.
Wow, that is definitely an effect. When you moved out, Vanessa, did the spirit activity continue in your new home?
Yeah, it did, only for a couple of weeks. Just for a couple of weeks. And then I was left alone.
What type of activity followed you?
There was someone there, but there was a picture in my bedroom, and it was on the wall with a rule plug, it was... And there was an almighty... And this picture had been wrenched out of the wall with the rule plug and have been thrown across my bedroom. Now, that would have taken some force to do that. And the noise... And I legged it upstairs as quick as I could. I thought, shit, excuse me, my language. I thought, what's that? And, but it didn't... thank God it wasn't very long. And then it left.
All right, Richard, go through the steps of this investigation. What other things occurred for you and your team that really led you to believe that this was not your typical quote-unquote haunted house?
Well, I like to use a mix of traditional and non-traditional methods. So the tech is all well and good. And, of course, we do the baselining and we check EMF levels and those kind of things. And for the most part, the cage was unremarkable in that regard. It was nice not having Wi-Fi to worry about. You set your phones to airplane mode and you're isolated pretty much. And the fireplace itself is a log burning fire, so it's very old school in that regard. But we would also use techniques such as scrying, which I'm sure your listeners are familiar with.
Right.
And again, one of our investigators had a very disconcerting experience where she described seeing a man in period clothing, and we're talking about 300-400 years ago by her reckoning, staring back at her quite malevolently. We used water and mirrors as part of that technique. We did bring a Ouija board also, and we used that quite extensively. And again, it depends upon what your opinion of Ouija boards is, whether you think it's entirely the subconscious doing it or whether you believe it's a real means of spirit communication. But if the latter, we were communicating with a spirit who said that his or its name was Redfast. When I did a little research, it turns out that back in the Middle Ages, Redfast was your nickname if you were red-faced, red in the face. You know, perhaps somebody that worked outdoors or liked a bit of a drink, as everyone did back then, or both. And this entity claimed actually not to be anything at all to do with the cage. He claimed to be a shepherd who had worked the prairie lands across the street and just dropped in from time to time, but that there were other spirits there in the cage also. Stephen, who was the priest as well as the paranormal investigator, he became convinced that what we were dealing with at the cage was, he described it as kind of like a psychic bottom feeder, if you will. You know, those, he thought that it was not entirely human. And again, I don't claim to have those sorts of abilities. You know, I tend to stay more on the traditional side of the spectrum. But that was his contention. And he performed a number of ceremonies, a number of blessings on the house in an attempt to rid the place of whatever it was that was haunting it. And I don't believe he was successful.
How many times, Vanessa, have you had people come through there trying to clear the home?
Since people first started coming a few years after I'd moved out, I would say hundreds and hundreds have tried, and nobody. Some groups say, you know, some people say, yeah, we think we've done it. Next week on an EVP, you've got the children again. Where's my mama? I'm looking for my mama. I don't believe it can be done. I truly don't believe that house is ever going to change. It's been tried so many times by so many different people in so many different ways and methods. Nothing touches the place. If anything, it just makes it worse.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Have you seen negative occurrences after a clearing or cleansing?
I mean, I don't go in there, the house myself, but I only go in there if I absolutely have to, or if I have to do an interview or something, but it'll always be during the day and I'll never, ever go upstairs anyway, you know, but, the house just consistently just gets worse all the time. I think the more people that come to it, the worse it gets, and the more people that do rituals and stuff in there, the more it aggravates it. I mean, it just gets worse all the time. It's a lot worse now than when I left, I'm sure.
Richard, of all the locations you've had a chance to investigate firsthand, on the scale of, top 5, would you put the cage in your top 5 most active?
If you're asking from personal experience, I would say it was in the top 5. Yeah, absolutely. If you're looking in terms of what I've been told by the witnesses that I interviewed and other investigators, then I would put it in the top 3.
That's fascinating into itself, right? I mean, that it's that powerful a haunting, and that there's so much going on, and you've got multiple spirits that are moving about in this location. Some seem transient, some seem locked in place. With this,
Sorry, Dave.
No, please go.
It's commonly believed that the most active entity there, the one that seems to be the linchpin and seems to have a role in keeping the others there, is actually a jailer. One that was cruel and took great delight in tormenting the prisoners that were in his charge. That's something I've heard from a number of psychics that I've interviewed regarding the cage, that it's this male, or at least male appearing entity that is still there and is keeping a number of them there.
Vanessa, what we know about the witch trials, right? I mean, these were people that were targeted and killed for beliefs and for, maybe vengeance from others, the idea of real quote-unquote witches being put to death, that really kind of escapes us in history. I mean, there's no proof that these people were practicing witches. There was no real magic being done. At least that's what it was in Salem and you know, in a lot of the America witch hunts. Is that what happened in England, or do you believe that there was something to the quote-unquote witches that they were putting out?
No, I believe there was. I mean, Ursula was a healer. She did make medicine. She did heal. She had, I suppose, we would say a psychic ability or a gift to heal. So that would have, of course, by the nature of what she was able to do, even by going off in the woods and making the potions, and here, you know, she admitted. She said, "Oh, okay." Okay, she had to say she was a witch. She had no choice because they'd got her son. But by the nature of who she was the healer of the village. She did obviously have powers of some. You know, I don't believe she was evil at all, and I don't believe she made the crops fail that year and killed the other babies that died involving in this case. But she certainly was a powerful lady, and I would suspect, you know, a gift of being a healer.
And again, I know it seems from videos and photographs we see these houses are often set far apart from one another. Are there other homes that are right near this cottage, this former medieval prison?
Well, it's semi-detached. It's attached to another house. It's attached to another house, which again was built hundreds of years ago. I've spoken to the neighbours over the years, and what the guy that lived there long term said he used to see a lady walking through my front room, through the wall into his kitchen. But of course, theirs wasn't a prison. Although it's a house, it's not a prison. So of course, they don't have anything like the activity. But yeah, they're right. And there's a pub right next door to it. There's ancient priory land opposite. You know, it's a very old English village, and all through the winter, the fog comes off the sea. We're 2-minute drive from the sea, and it's like something from the fog. I mean, you could just imagine. It's like something from a horror movie, this place.
But there's no real accounts for locations around you having this activity spill into it then?
No, I mean, there's lots of haunted locations in St. Osoph. You've got the Priory, the Galley, you know, you've got all that stuff. But no, I've never heard of it. I don't think there's a place in England that has got the reputation or is as active as the Cages.
The alley behind it, Coffin Alley, does have its reputation. Again, these ghostly possessions have been seen.
Very cool. So what was when you're wrapping up this investigation, Richard, what are you left with? What are your feelings and beliefs regarding what's taking place at the Cage?
Well, it's always been my contention, Dave, and this is a theory that wasn't mine. I believe it's been around for as long as there's been paranormal research. But the division of hauntings into, generally speaking, you have haunted places, people, and objects. And I do wonder with the Cage, if there isn't a mix, it's definitely a haunted place, but I do wonder how much of it involves the personalities. And knowing that Vanessa has had these experiences throughout her life, knowing that the poor gentleman that lived there before she did also
Richard, did we lose you? Well, Vanessa, are you there?
I'm still here.
It appears Richard has vanished from this conversation. The spirits have spoken, and they've taken him out on us. Vanessa, run! That's
I know, I'm not surprised. When you were saying about technical equipment going wrong in the Cage, the Japanese filmed a couple of months ago. They did hours of filming, caught immense activity on 2 cameras. When they went outside to review their footage, everything had been deleted. Now, in the house at the time, they were rewinding it and watching. They'd caught apparitions, they caught activity. Things were swinging and flying about. It was a very strong night in the Cage, and everything was wiped off both cameras. That happens a lot.
Well, Vanessa, I can't thank you enough for coming on to share your stories with us this evening and your experiences. I mean, it's chilling, it's fascinating. I'm glad that you survived it and that it didn't get to you or your child. And I hope that you remain safe as well with this attachment. Are you still trying to sell the house if you can find a buyer?
Yeah. Yeah, but you couldn't. But you can't live in there. I would never sell it to someone that wants to live in there because it's dangerous. Certainly, no kids. Kids must never be allowed in there. This house is dangerous. You know, it cost me a lot of money. I've still got a mortgage on it, and of course, I can't move forward with my life until the house is sold because I have to rent now. I'm 44 years old, and I'm still in rented accommodation because this house isn't ready to let go of me yet. I think you would have to buy it as. Well, it's England's most haunted, UK's most haunted house. I don't know what you do with it, but I think when it's finished with me, it'll be finished with me. But I just believe there's a purpose. But in 3 years, we've literally touched on very few things that happened. But of course, throughout 3 years, it was literally daily. The activity in there. And
I know there's much more covered in the book, so I encourage our listeners, check out Spirits of the Cage, True Accounts of Living in a Haunted Medieval Prison. Vanessa Mitchell, our guest. And Vanessa, while I'm out in England in August, I'm going to do my very best to come visit, and hopefully we can connect out there.
Yeah, that'd be great. Fantastic. I'd love you to come. I want you to feel it for yourself.
Oh, I'm definitely intrigued in doing that, and I don't know, maybe even coming in August, I may now be prompted to come in a few days early in order to try to swing out there and get a chance to investigate. Thank you.
Again, you can have the keys. You can go in there. You want to spend some nights in there. You know, it's open to public anyway. We have investigations, so people can come. But if you want the house to yourself, you can have the keys. I'll do the same as Richard. And if you're brave enough, we'll see. But you can go in there.
All right, Vanessa, thank you so much. We'll try to connect. Oh, Richard, you're back with us.
I am back. My apologies for whatever happened.
The demons got you, Richard. We were sure of it.
Oh, stranger things I'm sure have happened.
Thank you, Richard, for joining us and spending some time talking to us about your investigation. And what do you want to leave listeners with? What can they expect when they pick up this book, The Cage?
Well, I hope that listeners will read the book with an open mind. I hope that they'll ask their own questions. And, of course, Vanessa and I are available on social media to answer any of them. And those that are in a position to, I hope they give the Cage a try themselves. They drop by and see for themselves. At least one journalist from a national publication I know fled before midnight when she tried to spend a night at the Cage herself. So I'd encourage you. Yeah.
I'm saying how exciting. Vanessa's probably thinking, what a dumbass. But it would be intriguing. I would definitely like to check that out for myself. Spirits of the Cage, True Accounts of Living in a Haunted Medieval Prison. We will be back tomorrow when Troy Taylor is our guest with American Hauntings, the rise of the spirit world. We'll do that when we return to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.